Hello, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. On today's programme, people are dying so you can buy inexpensive clothing. Who's responsible for the conditions in the factories where garments are made? Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback. This is a conversation that if anybody is wearing clothes, it's essential viewing. What's the online community saying?
That's a good way to put it, Femi, and all of us, hopefully, for those
we don't want to go there.
Are wearing
Absolutely.
clothes. Our community is chiming in about how it took a tragedy to this extent for many of us to pay attention. And there's a tweet here that I'll bring up from Velvet, who actually tweeted you, Femi, in response to a tweet that you had. She says, "This definitely makes every single clothing purchase a decision of awareness." Now, in today's show, we hope to move past awareness to action. So if you want to get in on that conversation, please do. Tweet us with the hashtag AJStream.
Sitting next to Malika is Judy Gearhart, and Judy is the Executive Director of the International Labour Rights Forum. Her group is asking American retailers to sign the Bangladesh Fire and Building Safety Agreement, which we'll discuss in just a moment. Judy, welcome to the stream.
Thank you.
Now remember, this is a show that is driven by you joining in. So if you have a topic or story you'd like to see covered right here, just let us know. You know where to go to. Facebook.com/AJStream. I'm just actually scrolling through some of the stories that we're keeping an eye on. You can just jump into any of the threads, add your opinion, put in your suggestion.
My name is Sundus Abdul Hadi. I am a multimedia artist from Iraq living in Canada. I represent the medium and I am in the stream.
More than 1,100 people died in the factory collapse outside of Dhaka. It's possible we will never know the true death toll or how many people were in the factory to begin with. But 3 weeks later, the rights of the factory workers may finally be addressed. On Monday, several of the world's largest clothing companies agreed to an accord for fire and safety guidelines in Bangladesh. Now there's mounting pressure on large US brands like Gap and Walmart to follow suit. The government has also allowed workers to form unions without permission from their bosses. And while these breakthroughs are significant, many say it is not enough to bring about real political change, and it's time for consumers to start demanding more from retailers. So, on today's programme we ask, is there a deadly cost for the clothes that we wear? And who is responsible for the conditions in garment factories? Is it owners, brands, or we consumers? So here to give us a perspective from the scene of last month's deadly collapse is Taslima Akhtar. She's a photographer and activist and has spent hours documenting last month's building collapse and produced some of the most powerful images of the last couple of weeks. From New York, Elizabeth Klein is the author of Overdressed, the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. We also asked the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association in Dhaka, and they had agreed to be part of this conversation, but at the very last minute they pulled out of the programme. And that's really unfortunate because we really want to get that perspective from factories and from Bangladesh authorities, as well as from all the activists who are pushing for change. So this is what I want to do. If you're in Bangladesh or Pakistan or India, you own a factory, you have insight into how the factories operate and why they operate in that way, tweet us at AJStream. And we really want to get your opinions and your perspective into the mix. It's really, really important. Let me start with Taslima, our photographer, our activist. Taslima, when the building collapse happened, you rushed to the scene. What do you see? Take us back just a few weeks to when you turned up.
Before giving your reply, I want to express my deep condolence to those families who lost their beloved person and who are still missing. And I also like to remember Shireen, Polly, Shahina, Toslim, Belal, who lost their life in this rubble. Actually, on that day, when I have got the news, I just ran away that place, and I saw there were thousands of people all around the factory. They are running from here to there, and they're just searching there and looking for their family members or their fellow workers, and the rescue team also were trying to rescue a live person or dead bodies. And I saw they are doing these things, and it was a very painful experience for me and my life that I have never seen before.
What's really important about the photographs that we're actually seeing, these are the photographs that you actually took, and you put them initially up on your Facebook page, and your friends were quite critical. Can you explain to me what they were saying to you?
Some of my friends said that you don't need to show this brutal photo or this cruel condition of workers through your image to Facebook. But I feel when I saw them in the rubble, and I feel tremendous pressure, and I feel a pain that those workers who are the cheapest labor of the world, their life has become so cheap. So we have to see this, and we have to carry this pain. And I think that I have to spread this pain to all, because we should take the responsibility of this happen. Yeah.
When I was telling our online community about this program, I actually tweeted out this particular photograph that you took, and you can see it on my computer right now. It's called The Embrace. Tell us why this photograph has resonated so much with the rest of the world, and how you got this picture.
Actually, I was there on 24th April. I was there entire the day, and it was like 2 a.m. at midnight. I was there in the back part of the factory, and the whole day I didn't see any dead body from very close. And that time I was feeling so exhausted physically and mentally, and I feel that I need to see some dead bodies from very close, because I need to feel the cruelty. And then some of my friends, they are also working as a rescuer, and I went with them back part of the factory, and maybe it's third floor or fourth floor, I can't say what it was. And I went there, and that is not so easy place. And when I just look at them, I saw around that couple there are many other dead bodies, and somehow my eye just attract those people, and I feel so bad, and somehow I feel they're very close to me. Somehow I feel it's a very known sin to me, and it's really a painful experience for me. And I think through this image, it can speak many things. A single image can speak about their life, their working condition, what a bad situation they have bound to work. So I think I need to show this all over the world to raise their rights, their questions of their rights and their demands, and their living their life, these things.
Let me just open up the conversation and start talking about the clothing industry, and bring Judy into this conversation as well. Bangladesh, what is the appeal about making clothes in Bangladesh? It's the second biggest garment producer in the world after China.
It is, and the wages come out to $37 a month. Many workers make almost twice that with overtime and other ways of earning a little bit more money, but it's still by far among the cheapest producers in the world, and no other country producing at that cheap level can produce at that volume. So many brands over the years have said we can't afford not to be in Bangladesh.
Elizabeth, we started this program talking about what is the true cost of fashion. You investigated it, you wrote about it. What is it that we don't know when we're going along to a store and buying a t-shirt that costs, I don't know, $10 or even less? What do we not know as consumers that we should know?
I mean, there are a lot of different components to it. In my book Overdressed, I talked about how the cost in general of clothing is externalized. you know, there's a huge environmental toll, for example, of all this clothing that's being created around the world. And I think that, you know, Judy made a really interesting point about the volume of clothing that's being made around the world today. Americans alone consume 21 billion items of clothing per year. And when you really think about how all of that clothing gets made, it takes a staggering number of factories and it takes a staggering number of garment workers, you know, toiling around the world to produce that much fashion. And also consumers really expect a low price for fashion now, and they think that it's a fair price. And what they forget is that clothing is essentially handmade. It takes a person sitting behind a sewing machine to put it together. So when you see a low price on an item of clothing, it implies that whoever was making it probably was not getting paid a fair wage.
You know, Femi, I've been going through the social media conversation on this, and the retailers themselves are also using this medium to kind of talk back to us. So Joe Fresh, one of the retailers that was implicated in the collapse, wrote on their Facebook page on April 29th, "We're committed to keeping you all appraised of any new developments, and we want to share with you that we'll be providing compensation for the families of the victims." That sparked a conversation that I pulled up here on my screen. Karen Weingarten wrote back. She says, "In addition to compensating families, I hope you also work with international labor and rights groups. Industry self-monitoring is obviously not working," but that also got a response. Joe Reed, and Judy, I'll direct this one to you. Joe Reed writes back, he says, "The company is giving their business to a contractor in India who's then responsible for providing a safe work environment for its employees, not Joe Fresh. If they pulled all these contracts, they would be throwing hundreds of people out of work." So what do you say to that argument, you know, that these jobs are providing, these companies are providing jobs for people that need them?
Yeah, no, they are providing jobs, but what kind of jobs? And if they, let's say they provided 20% fewer jobs, but at 30% higher wages. I mean, in the case of Bangladesh, the wages really should be 3 to 4 times higher in order to meet a living wage. But let's say they paid a decent wage to these people, then you would begin to create a robust local economy because the workers would have the funds to spend money on the local economy. So you know, it's not just about the quantity of jobs, it is also about the quality of jobs and what those workers can do with their lives outside of work and beyond work. So I mean, that's critically important. I mean, the monitoring programs, if I can just add a comment to that. I think 15, 20 years ago, the brands said, oh, we have these global supply chains, which of course they created looking for cheaper places to produce. But with the global supply chains, then they figured, oh, we have to figure out some way to monitor these suppliers and at least show that we care. So the voluntary codes of conduct and monitoring systems were invented at that time. But what we found is that again and again, these systems are confidential and they're voluntary. So that means that a brand can monitor a factory, find a problem, and walk away without telling anyone.
And the consumers never know about that?
Yeah, no, they don't, because this is all sort of business to business in their supply chain. And what we're pushing for is we're pushing for brands to sign a binding commitment with workers. So you're no longer, and trade unions, so you're no longer sidelining the role of workers themselves in ensuring their own safety. It has to be a commitment to the factory, to stick it out with the factory to make sure that the fixes get made, and a transparent commitment to the workers to ensure that all of this is done in the open.
Taslima, you're in Dhaka, you're in Bangladesh, and you're following the clothing garment industry there and campaigning about better conditions. Describe the conditions that are very general, like that happen every day, and what you want that's going to be different.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Yes, sure. You're campaigning for a change in conditions in the garment industry in Dhaka.
Yeah.
What do you want to change?
You know, in our country, like 4 million workers work in this sector, and 80% of them are women, and like 80% of export earnings comes from this sector. And they're already, Judy said that they earn only near about $37 per month, and it is very hard to survive with this payment, and they bound to work in a very risky condition. And I think and there is a movement going on to raise their minimum wage, increasing their minimum wage, their living condition, which are really poor in our country. And I don't think this is only a local issue. It's an international issue because international buyer, global brands, they come to our country to make profit with the cheapest labor, but they are not enough conscious, not enough careful about the working condition, about the wage. They are making profit, and they come here to make profit by this cheapest labor. Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking. Sorry, carry on, Taslima.
And in our country, you know, our government is now talking about the trade union, but last few years there is no excess of trade union. There are many good good promises in our constitution, our paper in theory, but in practice, when workers raise their voice, the owner just fired them. So they are working in a very risky position, risky situation, and their important demand is trade union right, and it's very important for these workers, I think.
Taslima, I want to show our audience an idea about what fast fashion might look like. So a consultancy company worked for a Canadian agency to show them and create this picture. So we have, what does that $14 shirt really cost? This is 14 Canadian dollars, which is just slightly less than 14 American dollars. So here we have our shirt broken down into different colors. This is factory costs here, which is about 7 cents. And then a tiny little bit on the collar, for instance, would be labor. That would only be 12 cents. And then you're going back to sort of material and finishing. That's about $3 or so. So the entire shirt costs, when you add up all the costs, about $5 to make, and then it's sold at about $14. So that's that concept of fast fashion. And I just want to jump back to Elizabeth in New York. Elizabeth, if we want to have clothes this cheap, then how ethical is that? Where do the ethics come into this? And what should we be doing as consumers?
I mean, I think that, you know, in light of what's happening in Bangladesh and in light of the Rana Plaza disaster, I think consumers are for the first time really connecting the way we've been shopping over the last 10 to 15 years with, as you were saying earlier, with all of these global supply chains and with the plight of workers in other places. And I think that, you know, as I said earlier, there are many components to cheap fashion. A lot of times the materials are cheap. It's like the whole system is sort of based on this devaluation of clothing and of people who create clothing. I think Taslima said something very, very poignant about that it's almost as if there's no value placed on human life in this whole paradigm. So I think that consumers this is a turning point. They're realizing that when they buy clothing, it does, you know, it's impacting someone somewhere else in the world.
You know, Femi, it's interesting that you mentioned. Femi, it's interesting that you mentioned the markup. Hamza on Facebook says some reports indicate workers get 2 cents for a $10 t-shirt. Doubling or tripling that won't really affect the end product. This is a matter of corporate greed, not consumer thrift. But a couple people on Twitter mentioned something that I'd like us to talk about. Mikey says, ethically made clothes would steer me towards certain brands, but it's my budget that's the true driving force behind my purchases. And Amina says, I think shopping ethically is pretty privileged. Think of the average working mom. So Judy, you know, is there something to that buying ethically takes money?
Well, there are a couple components to what's being said. I mean, I think buying ethically doesn't necessarily take that much more money. I mean, the cost for the labor is so marginal compared to given what we saw. I think the problem is, how do you make sure that money gets to the workers? So, I mean, I've worked with brands in the past who tried to get living wage to the workers, but the thing is that they don't have a long-term, faithful relationship with their suppliers. They're playing the field all the time. The suppliers are playing the field all the time because they don't know when the brand's going to leave. So even if you said to a supplier, you know, we only want you to produce for us and maybe a couple other brands, the supplier's got to run and find a lot of different buyers. So there's no commitment there. That's why what we're looking at is you know, this dance between the buyers and the suppliers are trying to make things as cheaply as possible. The buyers are trying to get the best price as possible. I think the other piece of fast fashion, and maybe Elizabeth can comment more on this, is that you've got this production. It has to be fast, but it also means that different brands are not producing these long runs. It's not stable. I mean, you actually, if I find cheap T-shirts that are all sort of uniform, normal T-shirts, I'm not quite as worried about that as I am about the ones that are sort of fashionable and they're going to change next month and they're not going to be in the stores, because that's another component to fast fashion that's sort of creating a lack of commitment between buyers and suppliers. And it just to make it come back to Taslima's part of the story, in the Rana Plaza disaster, I think, you know, if any one of those factories, because there were several factories, 6 I believe, would have called any one of those brands and said, we have a crack in the building, we need to delay our delivery because we don't want to put workers at risk, every single brand would have said yes. Except the system is such that there's no way to be sure that the brand wouldn't come back next time for the order.
Elizabeth?
That's a really good point. Could I actually circle back around to what the listener was saying about price? One thing that I think is interesting is that Americans, and this is probably true of a lot of Western European countries as well, we actually spend the least amount of our income on clothing than ever in history. So I think that we are sort of hooked on buying large quantities of clothing for very cheaply. So when we start to contemplate paying more for ethical fashion, I think it sounds uncomfortable because we're used to shopping almost in bulk for clothing. So I think that people might need to shift their attitude a little bit in terms of maybe, you know, saving up for clothes again. That's something that's kind of an art form that's been lost. The other thing is that in the book, I went to a living wage factory in the Dominican Republic called Alta Gracia, and they actually produce for the college market in the United States. And the factory is totally unionized. They pay living wages, and they're able to offer their product at the same price as their competitors because the company has decided to make that commitment and to eat the cost and not to pass those costs on to the consumer.
Taslima, help us out here. If you're watching this program and you're feeling frustrated because you saw your picture, you've seen the tragedy that happened in Dhaka, you know it's not the first time buildings have collapsed and there's been tragedies. What can our audience do who go out and buy clothes on a regular basis? What should they do? What advice would you give us?
I want to say that I don't feel that it's only a tragedy. I think it's like structural killing. And I think who buy product from Bangladesh and who use this product, they should be careful and they should work as a pressure group to give pressure to the international brand and our government and owner also, because all are responsible for these things. So who are going to use this product, I don't think that is the solution if they think we are going to boycott this clothes, which clothes is with blood of worker. But I think that is not the solution. You know, the Disney brand, they already withdraw from our order, but I don't think it's a solution. If we want any kind of solution, we need to do something for the better working condition, better life of workers. So who are using these clothes, they have to careful about the global brands, what they are doing.
Okay, Taslima, thank you so much. You will hear more from Taslima, from Elizabeth and Judy in the post show at Al Jazeera at stream.aljazeera.com. And on our next show, we ask Israelis how they view the 1948 Nakba. That's when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced out of their homes during the creation of the State of Israel. Some view it as a justified tragedy, or is it a stain on a country's identity? I promise it will be a fascinating conversation. Until then, we'll see you online. So we're back with the online post show, and it's good to see you again after a few seconds, and we're going to pick up our conversation about the true cost of cheap fashion. So on set we have Judy Gerhardt from the International Labour Rights Forum. Elizabeth Klein is the author of Overdress, the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. She's in New York. Taslima Akhtar is an activist and photographer, and she's based in Dhaka in Bangladesh. Now, Judy was just whispering something to me. She's like, there's something that I need to say. What was that?
I wanted to add to the last piece that Taslima was saying. I think it's absolutely right. We don't want to see brands now running away from Bangladesh. That's not the point. Certainly brands that have been in Bangladesh have been benefiting from the profit margins. We need them to stay and try and really invest. I think Elizabeth started her comments by pointing out that we really hope this should be creating, I hope, a significant change in the way brands look. They can't just keep running to the next cheapest company. So one of the things that's been really heartening, we've been telling consumers and activists around the country, we've been getting them to mobilize, and we've set up a bunch of petitions thanks to Avaz and Some of Us and Change.org, a lot of these groups. We've got now more than 1 million petitions asking brands to sign on to a binding commitment to worker safety.
I'm actually looking at one of your petitions right now, and I want to show people as you're talking about it. This one is it's got Gap death traps. Tell me about that. So, Gap has long been a leader in corporate social responsibility for the past decade, and they were negotiating on the binding agreement, and they really got to a point where they couldn't sign on to a binding agreement, and they're still saying, oh, we'll sign on, but they're basically not looking at committing to the making a contractual commitment here. And that their position has had a chilling effect for so much of the rest of the industry. We really need them to come along. I think the outpouring of consumers and activists in this country has been beautiful. I mean, from the moment I woke up on the 24th, there was just this you could see this string of nonstop emails from people communicating, trying to figure out, okay, what brands, who can we get to help with the compensation? Because like Taslima said, there is not much value on workers' lives, and the compensation is too low. So we're the outpouring of consumers pushing the brands, I think, is a great thing to see, where you actually realize people here care about workers there. I mean, Judy, when you walked into the studio, and we both saw Judy do this, she was on the phone, she was talking to her office, things were happening, we had to make her turn her phone off because you had the latest news and there was momentum going. What happens in, the end of this week or next week when we're not getting any more news from Bangladesh? What happens then?
Well, and I should say, we've been really grateful to a lot of folks in the media like yourself and others who have really put some deep attention into this. We really are hoping that we're that we've done so much education over this past month, and also at the end of last year after Tazreen, which came just 2 months after the Ali Enterprises fire in Pakistan. So we're really hoping that awareness is at a whole new level. And how do we mobilize that? I mean, we're working through a whole broad network of groups. If you go to laborrights.org/safety, you'll find all sorts of ways to get involved in this, because it's one thing. Yes, shopping ethically is important, and there are a couple brands like Altagracia and Ethics Merch and Union Wear and brands like that are sort of small and really able to give assurances to consumers. But it's also about communicating to the mainstream brands that there needs to be a shift.
And we can tweet that site out to all of our followers, of course, who are watching today. But one of the things that people online are talking about is the role of governments in this, and it's something we mentioned in the main show briefly, but Sue Roberts on Facebook says, if cheap clothing is available, people who are short of money will buy it. The root of the problem lies with the laws of countries who don't criminalize sweatshops, as Sue calls it. Another one from Avnish who says, it's the responsibility of the government agencies allowing such multinational corporations to exploit the human resource. And Elizabeth, I want you to have a listen to this video comment along the same lines.
We know that the power to change the situation lies with these brands and these retailers. They have the power to dictate terms, and they have enough money to share around to ensure that everybody gets a fair deal. But up until now, it's just been left to them to set the terms of their own production, and they haven't done it. They haven't stepped up to the plate, and that's why we continue to see exploitation, very, very poor wages, unsafe working conditions, and the type of disaster that we've seen in Bangladesh with over 1,100 people killed. And ultimately, we believe at War on Want that it's up to governments to step in.
And that was John Hillary, the executive director of War on Want, who's been following this closely. But Elizabeth, I wonder, you know, is the focus on governments, like our community members are telling us to do, is the focus misplaced? Should we be looking at brands, or do those two things go in tandem?
I mean, I think that putting pressure on brands is probably the most effective strategy right now. I think that they have a lot of power over their supply chains and over working conditions, and when, historically speaking, when they're actually pressured and consumers you know, keep the heat on them to do the right thing, for the most part, they do come around. That said, I do think that there are rumblings, at least from, you know, some members of the government in the United States, to try and get involved. And I think that we're going to see more people kind of coming out of the woodwork and trying to put some pressure on the Bangladeshi government. But again, I think there's just there's a power imbalance right now. You know, the brands have so much power, and I feel like labor groups in Bangladesh maybe feel like if they could just get the backing of the brands and consumers in the United States, then things could actually change over there.
Taslima, I would love to go back to you and just ask you about the impact you think the Rana Plaza building collapse might have in your campaign and the rest of the world just being a little bit more savvy about the true cost of cheap fashion. Do you feel a sense that something is really going to change this time?
You know, like Rana Plaza, there are many things happen, like Tazreen fire, Spectrum collapse, but these are not new. But in Rana Plaza, what happened is really a big impact, because more than 1,100 workers died. And I think through my campaign, not only with my campaign, the activism of workers' union, the campaign of workers all over the world know what is going on in Bangladesh and how the global brands are making profit by them, and they are not careful about their supply chain. And I want to mention one thing again, that I think that the owner, the government also responsible, and international buyer also. And another thing I want to mention you that when any activist, any worker, or any photojournalist like me, we are trying to say anything in favor of workers, then our owner and our government try to say that we are making conspiracy against the industry. But what happened in Rana Plaza, workers are not responsible for that. Our government is responsible for that. Our owner is responsible for that. And I also think that buyer also responsible for that. So we want to save our industry, and we want to save our workers. If our workers are not in a good working condition, they can't produce quality work, and they can't develop our industry. So if we want to develop our industry, we have to be careful about workers' living wage, their working condition, and their trade union rights also. Yes.
I can't think of a better guest to have the last word on this program about the true cost of cheap fashion. You've just been listening to Taslima Akhtar. She is an activist and photographer. She took that remarkable picture, The Embrace. Let me just show it to you one more time, just in case you needed any more motivation to actually shop in an ethical way, if that's at all possible. Taslima, we really thank you for your input. Judy Gerhard is in the studio with me. She's the Executive Director of the International Labour Rights Forum. And Elizabeth Klein is in New York, author of Overdressed, the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. Elizabeth, Taslima, Judy, Malika, I know you have so much more sitting there on your computer. The community, thank you very much. You know the conversation will continue online. And on our next show, we ask Israelis how they view the 1948 Nakba. That's when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced out of their homes during the creation of the State of Israel. Now, some view it as a justified tragedy, or could it be seen as a stain on a country's identity? It promises to be a fascinating conversation. We will see you online.